He was assigned the one property the whole town mocked, a storm-broken lighthouse estate whispered to be cursed. Walter Adams, a 61-year-old realtor trying to rebuild his life, thought he was just managing a hopeless listing. But everything changed the moment Shadow, his 6-year-old German shepherd, dug his paws beneath a loose stone and uncovered a hidden chamber sealed for more than a century. Inside waited a forgotten covenant, a trail of coded music, and a truth powerful enough to expose a corrupt empire and save an entire coastline. And it all began with a man who refused to walk away, and a loyal dog who refused to be quiet. Before the story unfolds, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? A thin veil of coastal fog clung to the main cliffs at dawn, softening the jagged world in pale silver. Walter Adams tightened the collar of his dark wool coat as he stepped out of his weathered SUV, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The wind carried the metallic tang of the ocean, the kind that tasted of old shipwrecks and stories better left buried. Walter, 61, tall, spare, but still broad-shouldered from his younger days, had the kind of face carved by years of responsibility. Strong jaw with silver stubble, deep-set gray-blue eyes softened by grief he rarely mentioned. His salt-and-pepper hair was neatly trimmed, though a stubborn lock always curled forward no matter how he combed it. He moved with a quiet dignity, the way men do when they've carried too much, but refused to set any of it down. A widower for 7 years, Walter had built his life around his work as a high-end real estate broker, known in upper-class circles for his honesty, an odd trait for a man paid to sell illusions. Some whispered he was too gentle for the business, too kind, too principled. Others said the loss of his wife had carved out a hollow he filled with deeds instead of words. But here, facing the windswept ruin of Gullhaven Hall, he felt something flicker in his chest. An old ache mingled with a new, faint curiosity. By his side padded Shadow, his 6-year-old German shepherd, powerful and sleek, with a black and tan coat and amber eyes sharp enough to track the flight of gulls through fog. Shadow was the kind of dog who noticed everything, every rustle, every scent, every shift in his human's breath. Intelligent to the point of stubbornness, loyal with a fierce, guiding instinct, he had become Walter's steadfast companion since the worst winter of the widower's life, when loneliness had begun to fray the edges of his sanity. Today, Shadow's ears twitched as he surveyed the sprawling estate ahead, a vast, moss-bitten manor perched dangerously close to the cliff, as if daring the sea to swallow it whole. "Well, boy," Walter murmured, rubbing the dog's neck, "here's the assignment no one else wanted." The town had scoffed when they heard Walter had accepted the listing. Gullhaven Hall was whispered about, mocked, dismissed as a lost cause. The kind of property that made investors laugh and seasoned contractors suddenly remember they had pressing business elsewhere. But Walter had always been drawn to the forgotten, the abandoned, the places with too many stories in their bones. "Maybe it's foolish," he said under his breath, "or maybe it's just time I tried something impossible." Shadow whuffed softly, as if agreeing or warning. They crossed the weed-choked courtyard, gravel crunching beneath them. The manor loomed overhead, weather-beaten stone walls streaked with salt, tall windows clouded by time, and a roofline sagging like an old sailor's spine. Yet the structure still exuded a certain stubborn majesty, the ghost of past grandeur clinging to every ivy-wrapped corner, waiting for someone to see its worth again. Inside, the air smelled of dust, sea mold, and forgotten winters. Walter clicked on his flashlight and whispered, "Easy, Shadow." The beam revealed an enormous foyer with a tattered chandelier dangling like a fallen crown. The floor was cold marble veined with cracks and damp spots. Portraits along the walls stared through film-thick grime, their subjects' faces distorted by neglect. As they moved deeper into the hall, Shadow's nose lowered, ears pricked. The dog was alert, not fearful, but intensely focused. They reached the grand parlor, where Walter was scheduled to meet the structural appraiser. He found Leonard Pike, a short, wiry man in his late 50s, with thinning chestnut hair, spectacles perpetually slipping down a nose too sharp for his round face. Leonard's clothing, corduroy jacket, frayed scarf, mud-spattered boots, made him look less like an appraiser and more like a professor who frequently forgot what century he lived in. Leonard was brilliant, meticulous, and chronically anxious, the kind of man who whispered to beams and floorboards like they were misbehaving students. "Mr. Adams," he said, breath puffing in the cold air, "I must say this place is formidable. That's one word for it." Walter shook his hand. "Can you give me a sense of the foundation?" "In time." "In time," Leonard murmured, crouching near the base of the hearth. "Old estates hold their secrets close." Shadow circled them, sniffling at corners. Then Leonard reached the far left corner of the room and pressed his hand against a stone block set into the floor. The minute his palm made contact, he stiffened. "That's odd," he whispered. "What is?" Leonard pressed again, firmer, his face blanched. There's air behind it. A cavity." Walter frowned. "Like a crawl space?" "No, larger, much larger." Leonard's fingers trembled slightly. "Almost like a chamber. But there are no visible seams, no settling patterns. It shouldn't be there." Shadow growled low, as if he sensed something neither man could name. Leonard stood quickly, dusting his hands. "Mr. Adams, I'll need more equipment. Ground radar, thermal imaging. This is unexpected." "Is it dangerous?" Walter asked quietly. Leonard hesitated too long. "Places like this," he said finally, "rarely hide anything simple." The appraiser hurried out faster than he'd entered, mumbling excuses about returning next week. Walter watched him go, unease curling inside him. Shadow pressed against his leg, seeking guidance, or offering it. He was never sure. They explored the upper floors afterward, cataloging damage, making mental notes of potential restoration. But Walter's thoughts kept circling back to the hollow stone. A secret chamber. Why? And why hide it so well? At noon they drove into town. Walter needed historical records, architectural diagrams, anything to explain what Leonard had found. The coastal library was small but inviting, with tall windows and shelves that smelled faintly of lavender polish and old paper. Behind the circulation desk stood Kate Harris, a 59-year-old woman with soft gray-brown hair pulled into a practical twist, warm hazel eyes, and a delicate, almost scholarly posture. She wore a deep green cardigan dotted with pale lint, as though books themselves shed on her. Kate had the kind of presence that felt instantly familiar, quiet, steady, and surprisingly mischievous around the edges. Though widowed young and shaped by decades of caring for aging parents, she carried herself like someone who had made peace with solitude while still believing in second chances. "What can I help you find today?" she asked, voice warm and lightly amused, as if she already suspected he was something unusual. Walter felt a strange shift under his ribs, a stirring he hadn't felt in years. "I'm looking for information on Gullhaven Hall," he said. "History, maps, structural records, anything." Kate's eyebrows rose. "You're the brave soul trying to sell the place?" "Brave or foolish," Walter replied. "Haven't decided yet." She laughed softly, a sound that felt like the first break of sunlight after a long storm. "Follow me. I keep the older archives locked up, too delicate for casual browsers." As they walked, Shadow padded between them, occasionally brushing Kate's hand with his muzzle. She scratched behind his ear without hesitation. "And who's this handsome gentleman?" "This is Shadow," Walter said. "My partner, unofficial bodyguard, and sometimes therapist." "Smart eyes," Kate murmured. "He reads rooms faster than most people." "He reads me faster than I do myself," Walter admitted, surprising himself with the vulnerability. She opened the archive drawer filled with maps and property journals. Gullhaven has always had an interesting reputation. Storm damage, sudden ownership transfers, odd architectural choices. Some people say the original builder hid things inside the structure, though what or why, no one knows. Walter felt that flicker again, the same instinct that had brought him to the cliffs this morning. As he studied one of the faded floor plans, he noticed Kate watching him, not intrusively, but as someone trying to understand the shape of his thoughts. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing I can name yet," he said slowly. "But something's off at that manor. And not just structurally." Kate tilted her head, her gaze curious, steady. "Then perhaps," she said, "it's waiting for the right person to see what others have missed." Walter felt Shadow nudge his leg, almost as if saying, "Listen to her." He opened his mouth to respond. Something earnest, something unexpectedly honest. But before he could speak, the library lights flickered violently. A moment later, Kate's computer emitted a sharp beep, and a message flashed across the screen. One she had not opened, one addressed not to her, but to him. "Walter Adams, leave Gullhaven." There are things inside that should never be found. Walter froze. Kate inhaled sharply. Shadow growled at the darkening corner of the room, his fur rising along his spine. How? She whispered. How would anyone know you're here? Walter stepped closer to the screen, heart thudding. I don't know, he murmured. But someone's watching the estate, and watching me. And then, before either of them could speak further, the message vanished. Fog still pressed low against the cliffs as Walter Adams guided his SUV back toward Gullhaven Hall, the tires thudding across the uneven gravel with a sound that felt oddly like a heartbeat, slow, wary, expectant. Shadow sat upright in the back seat, his black and tan coat catching stray bars of pale morning light, ears sharply angled forward. The dog's amber eyes rarely blinked when the manor came into view, as though he sensed a pattern beneath its decay, a rhythm only instinct could recognize. Walter, 61, and heavy with the weight of the mysterious warning from the previous day, carried a taut line of concern beneath his ribs. He had slept poorly, replaying the message that had flashed across Kate's computer. Someone knew he was involved with Gullhaven, someone who did not want him near it. Yet he returned, because fear had never stopped him before, not even after losing his wife to an illness that stole her voice long before it stole her breath. He had survived grief. He would survive this. Still, he couldn't deny the pinch of apprehension that pulsed through him as he parked and approached the manor. Shadow hopped out first, sniffing the ocean-salted wind, tail low but steady, a guardian deciding where danger might be hiding. Easy, boy, Walter murmured. We're only looking today. No trouble if we can help it. The manor greeted them with its usual silence, the great wooden doors groaning open like lungs struggling to remember how to breathe. Dust motes swirled in the dim light, forming small galaxies that dissolved with each step. They began in the western wing, where sea air seeped through hairline cracks and left salt stains like pale ghost hands on the walls. Water spots traced paths along the ceiling, moss curled around forgotten edges. The once grand gallery smelled of wet stone and abandoned winters. Walter walked slowly, flashlight cutting through the gloom. This place deserves better, he whispered, though even he wasn't sure if he meant restoration or revelation. The first new room they explored was the old studio. Its windows, streaked with grime, let only a muted glow slip through. A dozen canvas frames stood abandoned, some slashed by time, others collapsing inward like tired shoulders. A toppled easel lay against the far wall. Walter's hand brushed one of the surviving canvases, revealing the faint outline of a ship in stormy seas. Unfinished, as if the artist had been called away mid-stroke. Shadow nosed beneath a draped cloth and sneezed at the explosion of dust, then stared up at Walter expectantly. Nothing yet, Walter said softly, but keep looking. They moved onward into the chart room, once the strategic heart of the manor when it served the coastal trade. A massive sea-worn high do hung crooked on the wall, lines of longitude faded, ink smudged by moisture. Walter reached up to straighten it, but the old nail wobbled precariously. Shadow, meanwhile, paced back and forth, sniffing the baseboards with increasing insistence. His body language changed, ears forward, tail stiff, breath quick. What is it? Walter knelt as Shadow pressed his snout toward a cracked panel in the far corner. The panel, warped with age, had a narrow seam barely visible unless one knelt close. Good boy, Walter whispered. He pushed gently. The panel resisted, then shifted inward with a soft scrape. A shallow cavity revealed itself, just large enough for a person's hand. Inside lay a small, rusted object. Shadow whined, pawing the floor until Walter reached in and retrieved it. A music box, but one unlike anything he had ever seen. Its metal exterior, oxidized, pitted, and faintly green from moisture, was engraved with a delicate pattern, a single blooming sea anemone, petals spiraling outward like a star. Even under the dust, it gleamed faintly, as though touched by something other than time. How long have you been here? Walter murmured. The hinge creaked softly as he opened the lid. Inside, tiny gears rested in ornate precision, though age had left them brittle. He lifted the small winding key, its base also engraved with the sea anemone motif. Well, he said, exhaling, let's see if you still speak. He wound it gently. At first nothing happened, then a single trembling note broke free, thin, fragile, like the cry of a distant gull. Another note followed, then another. The melody stumbled, stopped, began again in a halting, uncanny rhythm. It wasn't a song, it was a pattern. Walter felt the hairs on his arms rise. "Shadow," he whispered, "listen." Shadow tilted his head, ears twitching, eyes bright. The broken tune stuttered in short bursts, then paused, then pulsed again, distinct intervals of sound and silence. Walter's years of sailing with his father as a teenager returned to him, memories he had buried in the old grief of loss. "This is Morse code," he breathed, or something like it. When the music box fell silent, its final note hanging like a question, Shadow surprised him by throwing back his head and giving a soft, drawn-out howl perfectly matched to the last tone. Walter laughed, a real laugh, warm and startled, and light in a way he hadn't felt in years. "You're a musical genius," he chuckled, rubbing Shadow's ears. "Or you're mocking it. Hard to tell." But the unease returned quickly. Why hide a coded music box in a wall cavity? Why the anemone symbol? Why a chamber beneath the hearth? And who had sent the warning? Searching for answers, Walter called Kate Harris and asked if she could meet him at the manor. She arrived an hour later, bundled against the cold in her deep green coat, her silver-streaked hair pinned back in a loose twist. Kate moved with a calm, measured pace, the kind that came from years of navigating fragile archives and fragile emotions alike. Her hazel eyes sharpened when Walter handed her the music box. "This design," she murmured, tracing the engraved petals, "is 19th century. Maritime families used anemone symbols to mark cargo that needed protection. Rare items, sentimental pieces, anything easily lost." She listened to the melody when Walter wound it again, her brow furrowed. "It's not a standard music sequence. These short bursts, these pauses. Walter, this is a ship signal. 19th century vessels used a form of coded whistles for night navigation. Some captains converted them into personal motifs for identification." She met his eyes. "This could be a key, quite literally." A faint thrill ran through him. "A key to what?" "You said there was a modern steel door in the Lighthouse basement," she said. "A door far newer than the manor itself. What if that door wasn't meant to be opened by a person, but by a pattern? A sound sequence?" Shadow barked suddenly, startling them both. Then he trotted toward the hallway, looking back as if urging them to follow. "He wants to show us something," Walter said. They followed Shadow through the dim corridors, stores, past fallen portraits and cracked tiles, until he stopped at a staircase leading down to the old lighthouse tunnel, a narrow stone passage that connected the manor to the tower on the cliffs. The passage smelled of cold earth and old storms. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, each drop echoing like a ticking clock. At the end of the tunnel stood the steel door, sleek, seamless, entirely modern. Too modern. Kate stepped forward, her breath clouding in the chill. "It's wrong," she whispered. "Everything about it. This door doesn't belong to this century." Walter lifted the music box, holding it near the door. Shadow sat beside him, alert, calm, ready. He wound it one more time. The stuttering melody filled the narrow space, soft but insistent, like a relic pleading to be remembered. Then, impossibly, something clicked, a faint mechanical shift inside the door. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Kate inhaled sharply. Walter froze. Shadow growled, not in fear, but in fierce anticipation. And then the music box went silent again, but the door clicked once more, as if considering whether to open. The steel door's final hesitant click still echoed in Walter Adams's ears long after he and Kate retreated from the lighthouse passage. The sound had felt like a whisper, an invitation or a warning, he couldn't tell. Fog thickened over the cliffs by late afternoon, thick enough to turn Gullhaven Hall into a blurred silhouette of angles and shadows. But Walter didn't return to his car yet. Something restless stirred in him, like the tide pulling against rocks. Shadow paced beside him, equally unsettled, glancing back toward the tunnel every few steps. "We'll figure it out tomorrow," Walter murmured, rubbing the dog's neck. "One mystery at a time." But tomorrow arrived with a complication neither man nor dog could have expected. A polished black sedan waited outside the manor gate, sleek, spotless, foreign to the rugged coastal landscape. Its presence felt like an intrusion, a slash of ink across watercolor fog. A man stood beside it, examining Gullhaven Hall with the polite disinterest of someone appraising a flawed antique. Walter knew immediately that this was no tourist. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, with a posture so straight it seemed carved from marble. His hair, jet black with precise streaks of silver, was combed back neatly, revealing a sculpted face, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, and eyes the color of cold slate. His skin had the faint sun-bronze tone of someone who spent time aboard yachts more than beaches. He wore a tailored navy overcoat, gloves of soft black leather, and polished shoes that looked wildly impractical on the uneven gravel. When he turned, he smiled, a thin, elegant curve that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Adams, I presume?" His voice was smooth, controlled, almost soothing, if not for the undercurrent of detached calculation. "I am Philip Drake." Walter knew the name immediately. Anyone in real estate dealing with historic properties did. Philip Drake, 60, fabulously wealthy, collector of rare antiquities, rumored patron of private museums, rumored buyer of artifacts that should have remained where they belonged. He was known for charm, ruthlessness, and an obsession with anything lost to time. Shadow growled, subtle but unmistakable, his body stiffening. Drake's gaze drifted to the dog. "Magnificent creature, German Shepherd?" "Yes," Walter said flatly, "and he doesn't like strangers." "A useful trait." Drake stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back like a man strolling through a gallery. "I understand you've taken on the listing of this estate. Unusual choice." "I don't shy away from unusual." Drake's smile sharpened. "Nor do I." He paused, letting the silence weigh on Walter before continuing. "I'd like to make an offer, immediately. No inspections, no contingencies." Walter raised an eyebrow. "You haven't even seen the interior." "I don't need to. I know what it is." Drake turned his eyes toward the manor again, the wind tugging at the hem of his immaculate coat. "This house holds significance. Old families built their legacies here. Some legacies linger." Walter felt his pulse slow, not from calm, but from caution. "What price are you offering?" Drake reached into his coat, withdrew a leather folio, and handed Walter a typed document. Walter's breath caught. The offer was more than double the market value. "This is absurd," Walter murmured. "Even in perfect condition, the manor isn't worth—" "I'm not purchasing the building," Drake cut in gently. "I'm purchasing its history." Something in the man's eyes hardened, a glint like steel under moonlight. "And I strongly recommend you accept. This estate is dangerous for those who misunderstand its purpose." "Purpose?" Walter asked. "Everything has a purpose." Drake's tone remained polite, measured. "Some things should remain untouched. Some doors should remain closed." Shadow let out another low growl. Drake's gaze shifted toward the dog again. "You should listen to him, Mr. Adams. Animals sense danger far sooner than humans." Walter handed the folio back. "I'm not accepting anything until I understand what I'm dealing with." Drake didn't flinch at the refusal. In fact, he looked faintly amused. "Your integrity is admirable, misguided but admirable." He stepped backward toward his sedan. "Think carefully. You may not receive another offer before the house takes its next toll." Without waiting for a response, he entered the car, and the vehicle slipped away like a shadow gliding off the cliffs. Walter stood frozen, shadow pressed against his leg. "Takes its next toll," he repeated under his breath. "What in the world does that mean?" That night, fog thickened into a blanket so heavy, the cliffs seemed to vanish entirely. Walter stayed in the small caretaker's cottage near the manor, safer than driving home through the coastal dark. Kate had offered him her guest room in town, eyes warm with concern, but he had refused gently. "I'll be fine. Shadow won't let anything sneak up on us." "That's exactly what worries me," she had replied. In the cottage, Walter wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, staring at the offer Drake had insisted he keep. The number on the page tempted him more than he wanted to admit. Selling the manor would mean financial freedom, retirement, rest from the grind of endless negotiations and property disputes, peace, comfort, safety. But Kate's face rose in his mind, her calm strength, the spark in her eyes when she solved puzzles, the gentle confidence she carried like a lantern. And Shadow pressed his head into Walter's lap, steady, loyal, unshaken. "You think I shouldn't sell either, don't you?" Walter whispered. Shadow huffed softly. Then came the headlights. Blinding white beams swept across the window, slicing through the fog like blades. Shadow exploded into a snarl, rushing to the door. Walter's heart hammered as he stepped outside. A dark SUV idled near the manor's side entrance, engine rumbling low. Someone inside flashed the lights again, once, twice, then abruptly backed away and disappeared down the road. No words, no face, no explanation, just a warning, or a threat. Walter rubbed his temples. "Okay, that's enough." The next morning he returned to town, bracing for the gossip he knew was coming, and it came swiftly. Two men leaning outside the diner muttered loud enough for him to hear. That realtor's lost his mind, wasting his time on that cursed house. He'll be out of business by summer. Others shook their heads sympathetically, pitying him the way people pity fools who don't know they're fools. By the time Walter reached the library steps, doubt gnawed at him. What if he was making a mistake? What if Drake was right? Kate met him at the entrance, her hazel eyes instantly sensing the turmoil inside him. "You saw the offer," Walter said. "It's generous, more than generous." Kate didn't look impressed. "Generosity isn't always kindness. The town thinks I'm making a fool of myself." "Let them," she said softly. "They laugh at what they don't understand." Walter let out a long breath. "Maybe I should just take the money." Kate stepped closer, her voice gentle but steady. "Walter, do you really want to walk away when the truth is right in front of you? You're not afraid of difficult things." Shadow nudged Walter's hand firmly with his nose, a clear, grounding gesture. Walter looked from Kate to the dog, and something settled inside him, something firm, something brave. "All right," he whispered. "We stay. We see this through." At that exact moment, the wind shifted. A thin, metallic note drifted from the direction of the Lighthouse tunnel, like a single chime struck underwater. Impossible, unexplainable, beckoning. Kate's voice trembled. "Walter, did you hear that?" Shadow had already heard it. He was staring directly toward the cliffs, ears rigid, tail low. The music box was nowhere near them, and yet the sound had come unmistakably from inside the tunnel, or behind the steel door. Something inside Gullhaven Hall was waking up. The cliff winds sharpened at dusk, carrying the smell of salt and old iron as Walter, Kate, and Shadow moved toward the hidden passage again. The echo of the strange metallic chime from the steel door had followed Walter all night, threading its way through his dreams. Now, standing before the underground wall, with its rusted knobs and 5 brass tumblers, he felt the same subtle pull he'd felt the day he first touched the music box. Kate held the lantern in one hand, its glow catching the strands of silver in her hair. "You ready?" she whispered. Walter nodded. Shadow stood rigid beside them, ears pricked, muscles tight. The dog seemed to already sense the pattern humming beneath the silence. Walter lifted the music box carefully from his satchel. It was an old object of cherry wood, carved with symbols that looked nautical yet unfamiliar, spirals, wave lines, and a compass rose missing one of its cardinal points. "Let's try this again," he murmured. He wound it once. The melody began, soft, lilting, a lullaby for sailors or a farewell hymn for the lost. Kate closed her eyes, listening. "There," she whispered. "Every 4th note dips, almost like someone pressing down." Walter nodded, guiding the first tumbler in sync with the falling note. A click sounded. Shadow let out a low rumble, not warning, but recognition. The second dip corresponded to the second tumbler, followed by another firm click. Kate steadied the lantern, its glow turning golden on the damp stone. "3 left," she murmured. The melody rose then fell sharply at the 9th note. Walter matched the rhythm, click. The room held its breath. Shadows trembled across the walls. 2 more dips passed in the same oddly beautiful pattern. 2 more clicks answered. The tumblers aligned. The steel door shuddered as if waking from decades of sleep. Its gears groaned, metal scraping against metal. Slowly, heavily, the door swung inward. The chamber beyond exhaled cold air tinted with dust and sea brine. Kate stepped in first, cautious but steady. Walter followed, lantern lifted high. Shadow padded ahead, tail low but fearless. The room was larger than they expected, a sprawling archival chamber carved beneath the lighthouse foundations. Shelves lined the stone walls, packed with bundles of documents wrapped in oilcloth, crates stamped with naval insignias, and ledgers stacked in neat, solemn rows. In the center rested a long table of dark oak. A journal lay open upon it. Its ink had faded to sepia, but the handwriting, bold, looping strokes of a confident man, remained clear. "A ship captain," Kate murmured, tracing the ink gently. "19th century." Walter leaned closer. The first page bore the name, Captain Elijah Mercer, written with the steady hand of a man used to signing orders. Judging by the bold strokes, Walter imagined him as a broad-shouldered man with weather-creased skin, gray whiskers, and the resolute eyes of a leader accustomed to dangerous seas. The log entries confirmed it. Captain Mercer chronicled cold nights, rough tides, and clandestine journeys along the coast, but the mission he recorded was unlike any naval operation. He described secret voyages guiding escaped enslaved families away from hunting parties, hidden beneath the decks of his lantern-lit ship. Running a maritime branch of the Underground Railroad, Kate drew in a sharp breath. This place, it wasn't just a storage room. It was a refuge, a waypoint. Shadow stood beside the table, alert but calm, as if understanding the gravity in their voices. Walter lifted a second book, a thicker one bound in cracked leather, its spine stamped with a faint eagle emblem. Inside lay Cold War documents, coded transmissions, and cipher notes with signatures from unnamed intelligence officers. This chamber was used for decades, Walter said. Different eras, different secrets. Kate opened another box and froze. Inside were curated artifacts, ancient pottery shards, carved figurines, fragments of marble reliefs, each tagged with a handwritten note identifying origin countries and recovery sites. But one more detail stood out. Several artifacts bore a thin strip of paper, confiscated from Drake Shipping Co. Walter's pulse tightened. This ties the Drake family to illegal antiquities trafficking. Kate nodded slowly, her expression darkening. Philip Drake wasn't here for the real estate. He's trying to bury history that implicates his own bloodline. Shadow suddenly trotted toward the far end of the chamber. Walter and Kate followed. The dog stopped before a chest, smaller than the others, carved with a crest of crossed anchors and a lighthouse beam. It was locked with an ornate clasp, the metal dulled by age. Walter found a key inside the captain's ledger. When he turned it, the lock opened with a soft snap. Inside the chest lay a thick, folded parchment sealed with red wax. The seal bore the same crossed anchors. Kate lifted it reverently and unfurled it onto the table. A header read, "Harbor Covenant of Gullhaven," beneath it, elegant cursive. This covenant, witnessed by the seafarers, guardians, and trustees of Gullhaven, declares that if a rightful steward restores the legacy of this estate and returns all displaced artifacts to their true origins, the Gullhaven Preservation Fund, held in perpetuity, shall release its full endowment to protect the cliffs, lighthouse, and harbor for the people of this community. Walter blinked, stunned. A preservation trust, hidden away for generations. Kate's voice trembled. So, Gullhaven Hall wasn't a curse. It was a responsibility, an inheritance of protection. The remaining lines contained signatures: sailors, lighthouse keepers, local councilmen. Walter ran a thumb over the names. Whoever fulfills this covenant gains the right to activate the fund. And whoever tries to claim the estate without honoring it... Kate trailed off. They didn't need to guess. Philip Drake's offer suddenly felt like a threat against history itself. Shadow sneezed, nudged Walter, then looked toward the entrance. Someone was coming. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing faintly through the passage. Walter's pulse spiked. Kate extinguished the lantern. The chamber fell into near darkness except for the faint blue glow of moonlight from the tiny ventilation shaft above. Shadow positioned himself between the door and his humans, body lowered, silent but ready. A figure appeared in the archway, elderly, slightly hunched, lantern in hand. Walter exhaled in relief. It wasn't Drake or one of his men. It was Harriet Glenn, an elderly woman from the town historical society. Harriet was in her late 70s, short and bird-like, with a halo of white curls around her narrow face. She wore a faded cardigan and corduroy trousers, her boots muddy as though she'd trekked through half the coastal path. Known for her curiosity and sharp tongue, Harriet was harmless, with the exception of her relentless gossip. But tonight her face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew the stories weren't just stories." Kate guided her inside gently. "Harriet, how did you find us?" "Saw your footprints toward the cliffs. And that awful Drake fellow was snooping around town again." Harriet swallowed hard. "Walter, you're in danger. He means to take this place, whatever the cost." Walter exchanged a look with Kate, then with Shadow. Then he closed the covenant gently. "Good," he said quietly, "because now we know what we're protecting." The chamber air thickened with resolve. Beyond the stone walls, the tide shifted, as if the sea itself were listening. The storm arrived with no warning, only a bruised sky pressing low over the cliffs and a wind that howled like an old god woken too soon. By the time Walter, Kate, Shadow, and Harriet reached the upper floor of Gullhaven Hall, the world outside had already vanished behind sheets of rain. The ocean slammed against the rocks below, each strike sending tremors through the old foundations like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The power failed in a single violent blink. Lamps flickered. Then darkness swallowed the hall. Walter steadied himself. His broad, weathered face, lined by years of grief and quiet endurance, was soft with worry as he touched Kate's arm. "Stay close," he said, voice low. Kate's pale, thoughtful face lifted to his, strands of silver hair clinging to her cheeks from the damp. She nodded, but didn't step back. Shadow brushed against Walter's leg, tense and alert, nose lifting to the air. The dog's black and tan coat bristled under the dim emergency lantern that Harriet had pulled from a wall hook earlier. The shepherd's amber eyes glowed with instinctive alarm. Someone, was inside the estate. Harriet, usually sharp-tongued and bold, shrank into her cardigan, her narrow shoulders trembling. "It wasn't this bad on my walk over," she whispered. "The wind. It sounds angry." Walter took the lantern from her hand, its flame fluttering. "Storms don't creep people up a cliff road, Harriet." A sound echoed through the corridor. Soft, deliberate, wrong. Footsteps. Kate stiffened. "They're here." Walter didn't need to ask who they were. The Drake men, the same shadows that had circled the property days before. Lightning cracked across the coastline, briefly illuminating silhouettes moving along the far hallway. 3, maybe 4 men. One carried something metallic, a long canister. A shiver ran through Walter's spine. "Accelerant. Get back," he whispered. "Now." But it was already too late. A figure surged forward from the darkness. A man of medium height, with close-cropped hair, wearing a black waterproof jacket and work boots. Someone hardened, someone used to being ordered more than thinking for himself. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp as though carved from stone, and his eyes were the cold, unblinking kind of someone who no longer questioned what he did. He swung the canister and sprayed a sharp stream across the wall tapestries. Another man struck a match. The fabric ignited with a whoosh, flames racing upward like hungry fingers. Crystal glass cracked from the heat. Smoke burst into the hall in gray waves. Shadow barked once, loud and furious, launching toward the intruders. Walter grabbed him by the collar. "No! Shadow, with me!" The dog strained but obeyed, growling deep in his chest. Kate sputtered as smoke filled the corridor. "The archives! Walter, they're going for the archives!" He knew. Of course Drake's men would destroy the evidence. Everything. Captain Mercer had written, everything that could expose their family's crimes across generations. Walter's jaw hardened. "Harriet, go back to town. Take the side trail. Stay out of sight." The old woman didn't move. "I'm not leaving you two to fight criminals with a dog and a lantern." Walter almost smiled despite the chaos. "Harriet, please." Something in his tone convinced her. Trembling, she turned and hurried toward the service stairwell. Flames surged behind them, heat pushing down the hallway. A ceiling beam cracked and fell with a heavy thud. Kate gasped. Walter grabbed her hand. "Come on!" They dashed through the thickening smoke. The fire spread fast, far too fast. The intruders must have soaked parts of the corridor earlier, preparing this. Another explosion of sparks rained from above as a wooden crossbeam splintered. Kate stumbled. Shadow jumped to her side, pressing against her leg, guiding her back to her feet. "Good boy," she coughed, tears streaming from the smoke. But then, another crash. The floor buckled. The ceiling groaned as though taking its final breath. Kate looked up just in time to see the map room doorframe collapse inward. "Walter," she cried. The map room, where all the maritime charts lay, was engulfed in orange light. Walter released her hand and sprinted toward it. "Walter, no!" Kate shouted. He didn't stop. For all his professional calm, Walter carried a pain that shaped him more deeply than he ever admitted. The loss of his wife years ago in a house fire sparked by faulty wiring. Ever since, flames made him feel like he was running against time itself, racing a fate he once failed to beat. He would not lose another person he cared for. Not again. The map room doorway caved in as Walter reached it. Kate was pinned beneath a fallen beam, coughing violently, trapped behind splintered timber. "Walter, help!" He threw his shoulder into the beam. It didn't budge. Shadow sprinted past him, teeth bared, and grabbed the dangling end of the fallen support beam with his jaws. Muscles rippling beneath his thick coat, Shadow pulled, leveraging his entire body weight. The beam shifted, just enough. Walter shoved harder. The wood gave. Kate crawled out on her elbows, gasping. Shadow nudged her cheek as if counting her breaths. Kate weakly ran her fingers through his fur. "You saved me," she whispered. The air grew hotter, the smoke thicker. Walter glanced to the far wall where the old lighthouse chain ran, a relic from the original construction. Its rope still connected to the exterior bell used before maritime radios existed. Shadow's ears flicked toward the chain. Then, without warning, the shepherd bolted. "Shadow!" Walter yelled, but the dog ignored him, leaping through the haze toward the hissing flames. Kate cried out, thinking he was lost. But the dog wasn't charging into the fire. He lunged for the chain. He clamped his teeth onto the rope and pulled, with all his power. The old bell outside, so large it hadn't rung in decades, shook free of dust and memory. Its voice boomed across the cliffs, a raw, metallic cry swallowed by the storm and thrown into the town below. Kate covered her ears. "The lighthouse bell! It's calling the patrol!" Walter felt tears sting his smoke-dry eyes. Shadow kept pulling, muscles straining, body shaking with effort. The bell rang again, again. Its echo rolled across the coast, reaching far enough for volunteer responders, the sheriff's office, and the Coast Guard to hear. Boots thundered on the stairs, Drake's men retreating deeper into the hall. Outside, engines roared, sirens wailed through the wind. "They're coming," Kate whispered. Walter grasped her shoulders. "We have to get out, now!" Together they pushed down the hall, Shadow guiding them past falling beams and burning drapes. When they reached the entry chamber, Walter spotted movement at the broken doorway, a tall man in a charcoal coat sprinting toward the cliff path. Philip Drake. Even in the storm's chaos, Drake's appearance was composed. Dark hair slicked from rain, square jaw tense with rage, expensive coat whipping like the flag of a sinking empire. His gray eyes held no fear, only calculation. He ran toward the boathouse. Sirens cut him off. Flashlights converged. The sheriff's deputy tackled him into the mud. Drake shouted, struggling, but another deputy snapped cuffs over his wrists. The wind drowned his curses. Inside the burning hall, Walter, Kate, and Shadow stumbled into the rain-soaked night, collapsing onto the wet grass. The sky flashed with violent white light. Kate leaned against Walter, her breath ragged, hands shaking. He wrapped an arm around her instinctively. Their faces, streaked with ash, glowed faintly with the fire's distant reflection. They both laughed, a fragile, breathless laugh, because they were alive. Shadow dropped beside them, panting heavily. Kate touched Walter's hand, fingers trembling. He squeezed back. Behind them, Gullhaven burned like a memory refusing to be buried. Morning light broke slowly over the battered coastline, soft and gold, as if the storm of the previous night had never existed. Gullhaven Hall still stood, scarred, blackened in places, and surrounded by the scent of wet ash. But it stood. And for Walter Adams, that alone felt like a miracle stitched by stubborn stone and whatever unseen grace watched over lost things. Workers from the town arrived before sunrise, some in raincoats still dripping, others carrying tool belts or crates of supplies. They moved with a mix of awe and determination, speaking in low tones as though afraid to disturb the quiet triumph settling over the estate. Shadow patrolled the grounds in broad, confident strides, tail raised, nose twitching as he checked every corner like a master surveying damage to his kingdom. His black and tan coat was still dull with soot around the chest, but his amber eyes gleamed with an alert pride. Children, drawn in by the tail of the dog who rang a forgotten bell, hovered near the fence line whispering excitedly until Walter waved them in. "He's off duty for the moment," Walter said with a tired smile. The children surged forward to pet Shadow, burying their hands in his thick fur. Shadow tolerated the fuss with regal patience, nose leaning into each small hand. One little girl clipped a paper badge, handwritten in crooked crayon, onto his collar. "Brave boy." Walter's breath caught. He rested a hand on Shadow's back. "You earned that, partner." Kate Harris arrived shortly after, walking up the hill from the harbor path. The wind pressed her hair, still silvered from the storm's damp, back from her gentle face. She wore a dark slate-gray coat today, long and soft, cinched at the waist. It made her look both scholarly and quietly luminous. Her hazel eyes found Walter immediately. He tried not to stare too long, failing completely. Harriet Glenn shuffled beside her, holding a plastic bag filled with muffins, to keep the men from fainting, as she put it, though her voice was still thin from smoke inhalation. "Walter," Kate said softly, pausing a few feet from him. "The Historical Society confirmed it. The artifacts are genuine, the diaries too. Everything Captain Mercer wrote was true. They already contacted the museums." Her voice warmed. and the families. Some descendants didn't even know their ancestors had been rescued by sea. Gratitude touched her eyes. It was the kind that went deeper than mere approval. It carried reverence. Walter exhaled slowly. The responsibility he had felt pressing on him since that first step into the hidden chamber now unwound into something lighter, something almost like peace. "Good," he replied. "They deserve to be home." What followed unfolded over the next several weeks, with the rhythm of tides returning to a long-neglected shore. Conservators arrived to document each artifact. A dignified historian named Dr. Leonard Bishop, a man in his late 60s with neat white hair, deep coffee-brown skin, and a voice so calm it soothed even during heated debates, oversaw the legal process of repatriation. He dressed in soft tweed coats and burgundy scarves and carried himself with gentle authority. A widow of 30 years, he had devoted his life to restoring lost histories, particularly those stolen, as he often said. Children often quieted when he spoke, as if sensing the gravity of his words. Walter admired him immediately. As each item found its rightful home, as letters were sent to descendant families, as ceremonies were scheduled to honor the remembered and the forgotten, something stirred in the heart of Gullhaven Hall. It was slow, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Life was returning. The Harbor Covenant activated once the last artifact was formally returned. Lawyers, town officials, and historical trustees gathered in the storm-broken courtyard to witness the ceremonial unsealing of the fund. When the amount was read, a murmur rippled through the crowd. There was enough money, not just for simple repairs, but for full restoration of the estate, preservation of the lighthouse, reinforcement of the coastal cliffs, and the creation of a community cultural center in the old West Wing. For the first time in decades, Gullhaven Hall wasn't a burden or a joke. It was a promise. Walter hired carpenters from the town, men and women with windburned cheeks, calloused hands, and a pride that came from working with the grain of old wood, not against it. He made sure the pay was fair, above fair. "If we're building something meant to last," he told them, "it should take all of us." As they worked, Kate took charge of planning the community reading room. She selected sturdy oak shelves, soft leather chairs, and lantern-style lighting. Walter watched her debate passionately with electricians, laugh with children helping her sort donated books, and talk gently with elderly townsfolk about creating spaces that were safe, warm, and welcoming. She was a natural steward, calm but bold, practical but tender. And with every decision she made, Walter felt his admiration deepen into something richer, something he hadn't let himself feel in many years. One evening, after a long day of clearing debris, Walter found Kate in the lighthouse's signal room, surrounded by nautical charts she was carefully flattening and preserving. The setting sun painted the walls in amber light. Shadow curled beside her, paws folded neatly, eyes half closed. She looked up, tucking a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "I think Captain Mercer would like what we're doing," she said. "He believed in giving people a second chance at freedom. Maybe Gullhaven was waiting for the same." Walter leaned against the old railing. "I think so too." Kate hesitated, then added shyly, "There's a volunteer dance tonight, for the restoration workers. Harriet insists I go." Her cheeks warmed, slightly. "Are you coming?" Walter blinked, then smiled, slowly. "I am now." That evening, lanterns strung across the courtyard bobbed gently in the breeze. It wasn't a formal dance, just neighbors and workers gathering with baked pies, cider, fiddles, and soft laughter echoing into the twilight. Kate wore a dark navy dress with a simple shawl. The color made her eyes glow like twilight on calm water. Walter wore a clean button-down shirt, one of the few he'd kept from his wife's old habit of buying him clothes he never wore enough. The memory no longer hurt the way it used to. Kate glanced at him, her expression bright with something warm and unguarded. "Dance with me?" she asked softly. Walter's breath caught. "Gladly." They moved slowly, careful of Walter's still healing smoke burns and Kate's sore shoulder. Their steps were unhurried, the kind that invited conversation without words. Over their heads, the lighthouse lantern flickered back to life, now powered by a new generator installed earlier that day. And from Shadow's collar, the small music box charm Harriet had gifted him rattled faintly. A simple tune drifted from it when the wind brushed the hinge. The melody was soft, familiar, the lullaby that had opened the steel door and revealed the truth beneath the lighthouse. Kate leaned her head gently against Walter's shoulder. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace settle into the cracks where worry once lived. He had thought this place would be the ruin of him. Instead, it had rebuilt him. And Kate. And Shadow. And maybe even the entire town. As the music faded, Kate whispered, barely audible beneath the lantern glow, "Walter, do you ever feel like some places know who they belong to?" Walter's voice was a soft rumble, steady as surf. "Yeah," he murmured. "I do. Sometimes the heart just finds its way home." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The moment itself held them, fragile and whole, beneath the watchful beam of the lighthouse that had waited decades to shine again. The first dawn came softly, as if the ocean itself were drawing a long, satisfied breath after months of holding its silence. Gentle light stretched across the restored facade of Goalhaven Hall, painting its newly mended stones in pale gold. The lantern room of the lighthouse glowed steady and proud, no longer a relic but a living sentinel again. At the courtyard below, the town gathered, young, old, and everyone in between, streaming along the cliff path with the kind of reverence usually reserved for ceremonies of remembrance. Yet, today was not a funeral. It was a beginning. Walter Adams stood at the threshold of the East Wing, hands in the pockets of his freshly pressed sea-gray jacket. At 61, his tall, lean frame still carried the same quiet endurance that had gotten him through nights of fire and storms. But now there was a softness around his eyes, a deeper ease in the lines of his weathered face. Shadow trotted proudly at his side, the German shepherd's thick black and tan coat shining in the morning light, chest puffed, as though he understood he was a central figure in today's story. He wore a new leather collar, dark brown, engraved with Shadow, guardian of Goalhaven, a gift from the local woodworker who'd carved it by hand. Walter bent down and scratched behind Shadow's ear. "Ready, partner?" Shadow answered with a short bark that echoed across the stone courtyard like a declaration. Kate Harris approached from the library wing, her appearance softened by the morning sun. Her hair, silver and light like sea foam, was pinned back with a simple clasp that shimmered faintly. She wore a deep green dress beneath a light gray shawl, choosing comfort over formality, which somehow made her look more elegant than any ceremony ever could. Her hazel eyes sparkled when she saw Walter and Shadow. "They're all waiting," she said, breath warm, voice full of excitement she rarely let slip. Walter offered his arm. She accepted. Together they stepped forward into the courtyard where banners waved with sketches of lighthouses and ships, drawn by local school children. The new sign above the entrance read, "Goalhaven Center for the Sea and Memory." A retired fisherman, Mr. Paul Wilcox, a stout man with hands like old rope and a voice roughened by decades of shouting over wind, rang a brass ship's bell to open the festivities. Children cheered, older townsfolk smiled, some brushing tears from their tired eyes. The center was no longer a collection of restored rooms. It was a living memorial. Inside, elders sat in rocking chairs beside panoramic windows, telling sea stories to clusters of school children, seated cross-legged in awe. One elderly woman with long white braids recounted her father's escape from Cuba by fishing boat. Another elderly man spoke quietly about fleeing Europe as a boy during the war. The walls around them displayed Captain Elijah Mercer's logs and maps, framed behind glass and accompanied by small plaques honoring the rescued. A craftsman in his 70s, Russell Pike, tall and wiry, with a white beard that curled gently at the chin, demonstrated ship-in-a-bottle building. His fingers were steady despite his age, his smile marked by gentle mischief. "Hands older than yours can still shape something fine," he told a little boy with freckles. Everywhere Walter looked, people were learning, remembering, and discovering that this clifftop hall they once mocked was now their own shared story. At the lighthouse overlook, two teenagers filmed a short documentary for their American history class. Down the stone steps, a group of veterans leaned on the railing, gazing at the waves. "Never thought I'd see this place alive again," one murmured. "That realtor, he did good." Walter heard the words but didn't turn. Praise never sat easily with him. It always made him think of his late wife, of all the ways he wished he'd listened more, been braver sooner. But today those memories felt gentler, like the tide smoothing out sharp rocks. Kate touched his arm. "You okay?" "Yeah," he answered quietly. "For the first time in a long while, I really am." Shadow barked, not loudly, but firmly, as though signaling the next moment was due, and Walter smiled because the dog was right. The dedication ceremony began. Dr. Leonard Bishop stepped forward, wearing a cream-colored linen suit and a burgundy scarf that fluttered in the breeze. His dignified presence made even the most restless children settle. "What has been restored here is not only a building," he said. "It is a lineage of courage, from those who sailed dangerous waters to those who opened hidden doors to truth. Today, we honor all who dared to protect the vulnerable. And we thank Mr. Walter Adams, Ms. Kate Harris, and Shadow," he inclined his head toward the shepherd, "for reminding us that stewardship is an act of love." Applause rose like a wave. Shadow barked once, nodding solemnly, sending laughter rippling through the crowd. That was the first dawn, community healed, heritage reclaimed, and a home reborn. The second dawn arrived at twilight. It came without ceremony, without banners, without speeches, just the hush of evening settling over the lighthouse. The restoration festivities had ended hours ago. Workers had gone home. Lanterns along the courtyard glowed like fireflies in a gentle arc. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and salt. Walter stood at the lighthouse balcony, the sea below shimmering in the last threads of sunset. The pocket of his jacket waved slightly. He touched it once, then again, steadying himself. Kate joined him quietly, as she always did at the moments he didn't need words. "Beautiful evening," she whispered. "It is," he answered, though he was looking at her, not the horizon. Her cheeks warmed in the late daylight. Shadow lay at their feet, chin on his paws, watching them with the patient wisdom of someone who had already seen where this night was going. Walter cleared his throat. His heart thudded harder than it had the night of the fire. "Kate, for months now, ever since the first day at the archive," she smiled. "The day you nearly tripped over a crate while trying to impress me? I wasn't trying. Okay, maybe a little." She laughed softly. Walter reached into his jacket and drew out a small object, a polished silver anchor pendant on a fine chain. The metal glimmered faintly, engraved with delicate letters. "Home is where the light finds us." Kate's breath caught. Her hand rose slowly to her lips. "Walter, I can't promise a perfect life," he said, voice thick. "But I can promise to walk the cliffs with you, to laugh with you, to stand with you in every storm. You pulled me back into the light, Kate, and I want to spend the rest of my days earning that." She blinked rapidly, eyes bright with tears. "Yes," she whispered. "My answer is yes." Walter didn't realize he had been holding his breath until it escaped in a trembling sigh. He slipped the anchor pendant around her neck, his fingers brushing the warm pulse at her collarbone. Shadow stood abruptly, tail wagging in wide arcs, sensing joy with perfect instinct. And then, almost as if choreographed by some benevolent spirit, a gust of wind shifted. Shadow barked sharply, then bounded toward the small wooden box Harriet had left earlier, the ring box she had crafted for fun. The shepherd grabbed the velvet pouch inside, trotted back, and sat proudly at Walter's feet. Kate laughed, delighted. "Shadow," she said, "you're carrying the rings?" Walter knelt and retrieved the slender gold bands from the pouch. "Well," he said softly, looking into Kate's shining eyes, "seems he approves." They exchanged rings there beneath the lighthouse lantern. No audience, no orchestra, only the rhythmic sigh of the sea and the steady heartbeat of a dog who had saved them both. As their hands clasped, the lighthouse beams swept over them, turning the world momentarily silver. The wind shifted again, warm this time, like a blessing. Shadow barked once, loud and clear, the moment the horizon swallowed the sun. And in that instant, it felt exactly like a new dawn rising. Two dawns, one for the world, one for the heart. The lessons were simple yet vast as the ocean. Courage is a gift best used for others. Love arrives when we stand steady in storms. And sometimes, the greatest treasure of all is a loyal dog who rings a bell to call the whole world to remember what truly matters. In the end, Walter, Kate, and faithful Shadow reminded us of something we often forget as the years pass. Miracles do not always arrive with thunder, fire, or signs written across the sky. Sometimes they come as a quiet lighthouse beam cutting through a storm, a loyal dog pulling a bell rope at the exact moment help is needed, or two lonely hearts finding their way home again long after they believed their season had ended. And perhaps, if we look closely enough, we may see that these small miracles are never accidents. They are gentle whispers from God, nudging us toward courage, kindness, and the people who feel like safe harbors in a restless world. As you step into tomorrow, may you carry the same light that guided Walter and Kate. May you notice God's fingerprints in the ordinary moments of your day, an unexpected kindness, a door opening just when you feared all were closed, or a faithful companion reminding you that you are never alone. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with someone who might need a reminder that God still moves among us in quiet ways. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and let us continue journeying together. One story, one prayer, one small miracle at a time. May God bless you, keep you, and surround your home with the same steady light that watched over Gullhaven's shores. Amen.